That morning began like any other, quiet, soft, and ordinary in the way that grief teaches you to survive. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, staring out the window toward the garage. The air felt heavy with that stillness that only exists after someone you love is gone. It had been 8 months since James passed, but the house still carried his presence, the smell of his aftershave, the faint sound of his humming that sometimes I swore I could still hear. Then something broke the pattern. The garage door was open, just standing there, yawning into the pale morning light. My first thought was that maybe I'd forgotten to close it. But then I saw it, the hollow space where his car should have been. That deep red 9880 Mustang he'd spent half his life restoring, one bolt and memory at a time. The sunlight spilled across the empty spot, catching the dark stain where the tires used to rest. The smell of motor oil still hung in the air, mixed with dust and something faintly metallic. Everything else was untouched. His tools lined up neatly on the wall. The old stool still carried a faint outline of his work gloves. It was as if the car had simply vanished, leaving behind a ghost of what once was. My mind scrambled for an answer. Maybe it was towed, maybe Ryan had moved it, but deep down, I already knew. There was this sinking in my stomach. That quiet intuition only a mother has when something isn't right. I felt it in my bones before I even reached for the phone. James had loved that car more than anything he owned. He used to say it was a promise proof, that dedication could bring broken things back to life. And now, that promise was gone. I didn't cry right then. I just stood there, staring at the space where love used to live. My fingers tightened around the cold mug as the realization settled in my son had sold it. And with that single thought, the silence in the house changed. It wasn't the quiet of grief anymore. It was the quiet of betrayal, creeping in where love used to stay. I didn't have to ask. When I saw Ryan's car pull into the driveway later that morning, something inside me already knew the truth. The way he stepped out, hands buried deep in his pockets, shoulders tight, told me everything before he even spoke. He wouldn't meet my eyes, and I could feel the weight of guilt radiating from him like heat off the pavement. I remember standing there, the spring air brushing against my face, the sound of the wind chime swaying lazily above the porch. He started explaining himself in that quiet, rushed way he used when he was a boy, caught doing something wrong. I barely heard the words at first. Just fragments: money, Paris, Sophie's business trip. Then he said the number. 15,000. That was all. It took me a moment to process it. $15,000 for something his father had poured 20 years of love and labor into. My mind flashed to James, his calloused hands polishing the fender. The evenings we spent in the garage, just talking while he worked. The way he smiled every time the engine roared to life. To think that all of that, every ounce of devotion, could be reduced to a handful of bills made my stomach twist. And Sophie, she was there too. Of course. She stood beside him, immaculate as always, her perfume too strong for the open air. She looked at me with that polite smile people wear when they think they're above explaining themselves. Her voice, sweet but hollow, drifted in like a breeze that carries no warmth. She said it was just a car, that maybe it was time for me to move on. I can still hear those words echoing in my head. So simple. So cruel. I didn't argue. I didn't trust myself to speak without breaking. I only nodded, because silence was the only thing holding me together. Inside, I could feel something tearing, some invisible thread between the three of us snapping quietly, leaving the kind of emptiness you can't patch up. When they left, the house fell silent again. The light through the kitchen window had shifted, colder somehow. I stood there for a long time, staring at the coffee cup on the counter, the same one from that morning. My reflection trembled in the dark surface of the liquid. That was the moment it truly sank in. My son had traded his father's legacy for a plane ticket and a promise of convenience. It wasn't about the money. It was about respect. About memory. About love. And all of it had been sold away. Piece by piece. Until nothing was left but that quiet ache sitting heavy inside my chest. The morning after was quiet in that way that feels unnatural. Like the world is holding its breath. He hadn't slept. The house felt colder than usual. And the space around me seemed to echo. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of my empty coffee cup, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Everything felt stuck. Time. Grief. Even the air. Then the phone rang. The sound sliced through the silence. Sharp and startling. I almost didn't answer. It was an unfamiliar number. And in those first few seconds, I hesitated. But something, call it instinct. Or maybe the voice of the past urged me to pick up. The man on the other end had a rough, steady voice. I remember the first thing he said wasn't about who he was, but about the car. The Mustang. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. He said he owned a small classic car dealership on the edge of town, Garner Classic Auto, and that my husband's Mustang was sitting in his garage. I gripped the phone so tightly I could hear my pulse in my ears. He spoke with a kind of familiarity that made me stop. He said he'd known James years ago. That my husband had helped him once when he was starting his business. I could almost hear the respect in his tone. Then came the part that sent a shiver through me. James had left instructions for him, specific instructions. If the car ever found its way back to that dealership, he was to call me right away. For a second, the world tilted. My husband, gone for 8 months, had somehow planned for this moment. The man said James had mentioned a hidden compartment. Something meant only for me. My hands trembled as I tried to process it all. Hope and fear collided in my chest in a way that made it hard to think. I remember standing up without even realizing it. The chair scraping across the floor. The kitchen seemed smaller. The air heavier. The silence. Before this call suddenly alive with meaning. Whatever James had left behind. I needed to see it. Within minutes, I was out the door. The morning light cold against my face. The drive to the dealership was a blur. For the first time in months, I wasn't just surviving, I was moving toward something. Something that felt like him. The moment I stepped into the dealership, the air felt different, thicker somehow. Filled with the faint scent of oil, leather, and old memories. The place was quiet except for the low hum of fluorescent lights. And there, right in the center of the room, stood James's Mustang. Polished, gleaming, impossibly familiar. For a heartbeat, I forgot to breathe. It was like seeing him again. The same deep burgundy color. The same curved lines he used to trace with his fingertips. My knees almost gave out from the weight of it all. Tom, the man who had called me, stood nearby. Respectful. Almost solemn. He didn't need to say much. His eyes told me he understood what this meant. I walked around the car slowly. Fingertips grazing the cool metal. Every inch of it whispered pieces of our life together, the long nights in the garage. The laughter, when the engine finally started. The way he'd wipe his hands on an old rag and smile at me like I was the only person in the world. Then Tom showed me. Beneath the dashboard, he pressed on a small, almost invisible latch. A faint click echoed through the quiet space. I held my breath as a hidden panel slid open, revealing a small compartment. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name written across it in James's handwriting, steady, careful, unmistakable. My heart stuttered. I lifted it out with trembling hands. The paper was thick, aged slightly at the edges. I pressed it to my chest for a moment, closing my eyes, feeling the way my pulse seemed to sync with his memory. Then I opened it. The first line nearly took the air from my lungs. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I felt tears burn behind my eyes. But I kept reading. His words were calm. Deliberate, so very, James. He wrote that he had been worried about Sophie. That something about her never sat right. He'd done his own quiet digging and discovered the truth. Sophie wasn't who she claimed to be. She'd done this before. He said, married into families. Manipulated her way into control. And left destruction behind. My hands shook as I read on. He explained that he had gathered proof. Locked it away in a safe deposit box. And left instructions for me to find it, when the time was right. Then came the part that broke me. I know you'll be scared, Helen. But you're stronger than you think. Protect Ryan. He won't see what's coming until it's too late. Trust Tom. And remember, I'm still looking after you. The words blurred through my tears. I pressed the letter to my lips. The smell of the paper, mingling with the faint scent of oil that still clung to my fingers. I could almost hear his voice. Gentle but firm. The way he used to reassure me when life got hard. Even from beyond the grave. He was still trying to protect us. When I finally looked up, the world felt sharper. Clearer. The fear hadn't left. But something else had settled in its place, a quiet, burning determination. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, and held it close. James had started something, and now it was my turn to finish it. Whatever truth he'd uncovered, I would find it, and I would make sure his love didn't go to waste. The next morning, I drove to the bank with the brass key clutched in my hand like a lifeline. The manager led me into the vault, where the air was cool and still. My heart pounded as I turned the key to box 5, 1, 2. Inside was a plain envelope labeled, for Margaret. The handwriting was James's, steady. Sure. Timeless. When I opened it, my hands trembled so badly, I had to steady myself against the cold metal shelf. Inside were documents, stock certificates, bank statements, and another note in that same familiar script. He'd invested money years ago. Quietly. Almost secretively. And the returns were now enough to secure my future. But more than the numbers, it was the intention behind it that undid me. He had thought of everything. He had planned for love to outlast deceit. His letter reminded me to be careful. To use the funds for protection, not comfort. And to trust a man named Peter Coleman, a retired detective. He said, a man who knew how to uncover the kind of truth that people like Sophie tried to bury. When I met Peter that afternoon at a small cafe, I saw in his eyes that he already knew why I was there. He laid out a thin folder filled with photos, marriage records, and headlines. Sophie's face stared back at me, different hair, different names, but the same calculating smile. She had done this before, more than once, always leaving families in ruin. I felt sick. But I also felt something else rising in me, a steadiness I hadn't known in months. James had been right all along. We spent days preparing, gathering the final pieces of proof. I tried to speak to Ryan, to show him what his father had uncovered. But denial is a powerful thing. It took seeing Sophie's pattern, her 2 previous marriages, both ending in bankruptcy, for him to finally look me in the eye, with tears of realization. My son's silence that evening said more than any apology could. A week later, everything came to a head. Sophie returned from Paris as if nothing had happened, smiling that same practiced smile. But beneath the charm, I saw it nervousness, calculation. When she spoke about selling the house, I stayed calm, just as Peter had advised. Let her reveal herself. She always does. And she did. By the time the authorities were ready, the plan was already in motion. At dawn, I stood at the edge of the airport terminal, watching her glide toward security in her designer coat, pulling 2 expensive suitcases behind her. Ryan was beside me, pale and silent. My heart pounded as detectives approached her. For a brief second, she looked back and saw us. Recognition flickered. Then panic. She tried to run. The officers caught her within seconds. The echo of her protest, angry, desperate, filled the terminal. I didn't feel triumph. Just relief. James's truth had finally caught up to her. Justice, quiet and unflinching, had found its way. As the detectives led her away, Ryan's hand found mine. His grip was trembling but strong. In that moment, standing beneath the sterile airport lights, I felt something shift inside me. The weight of grief and betrayal began to loosen. James's plan had worked not out of revenge, but out of love. Truth had done what anger never could. It had set us free. Ryan came back a week after everything ended. And he didn't knock, just stood on the porch holding 2 suitcases and a look that said more than words ever could. His eyes were tired. His shoulders slumped in that quiet way of someone carrying too much guilt. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, asking if he could stay for a while. I didn't answer right away. I just opened the door wider. That was enough. For the first few days, he barely spoke. The house was quiet again. But it was a different kind of silence, not the emptiness of grief, but the fragile hush of something slowly healing. Sometimes I'd find him sitting in the garage, staring at James's old tools. One evening, I walked in to find him holding the work journal. His father had kept its pages smudged with grease. The handwriting neat and deliberate. He was reading an entry from years ago, about teaching him to change the oil for the first time. I saw tears slip down his face before he turned away. He said he didn't deserve forgiveness. I told him forgiveness wasn't something you earn, it's something you accept when love refuses to let go. I could feel James in that moment, in the stillness between us, reminding me that family isn't defined by perfection, but by the willingness to try again. A few days later, Tom Garner showed up with the Mustang on a trailer. It looked just as it had the day I first saw it, polished, gleaming, whole again. Tom handed me the keys and said simply that James would have wanted it back home. Ryan didn't say anything, but I saw his jaw tighten, his eyes wet. He touched the hood like it was something sacred. We started working on it together slowly, carefully. He'd read from James's journal while I handed him tools. The way I used to hand them to his father. The smell of oil filled the air again. And the sound of metal against metal became our rhythm. There was peace in it. A quiet kind of grace that words could never touch. When the Mustang finally roared back to life, we both froze. The engine's low hum filled the garage like a heartbeat. Ryan turned to me, his face soft for the first time in months, and said I should drive first. So I did. As the car rolled down the street, wind rushing through the open windows, I felt something lift from my chest. It wasn't just the sound of the engine, it was James. It was us. It was everything broken finding its way back together. That drive wasn't about going somewhere new. It was about coming home to love, to forgiveness, to the quiet truth that healing always begins where loss once lived. Autumn came quietly that year. The air turned crisp, and the trees along Maple Street burned gold and copper, their leaves swirling across the driveway like tiny memories set free. Each morning, I woke to the sound of the Mustang's engine coming to life, a deep, steady hum that filled the house with warmth instead of silence. Ryan always started it early, just like his father used to. The sound had become a kind of heartbeat, reminding me that life was still moving forward, still finding its rhythm again. Ryan works full-time with Tom now, learning the same craft that once defined James. There's a light in his eyes I haven't seen since he was a boy, something steady, something hopeful. He told me once that fixing broken things makes him feel closer to his dad, and I understood exactly what he meant. Sometimes, in the late afternoon, I'll sit on the porch and watch him pull the car into the garage. The sun catching that deep burgundy paint. It still gleams like the day James first finished it. Only now. It carries more than memories, it carries healing. I've come to realize that James's love didn't end when his heart stopped beating. It just changed shape. It became the guidance that pulled me through betrayal, the strength that helped me forgive, and the light that brought our family back home. His greatest revenge was never about anger or punishment. It was about truth, the kind that doesn't destroy but restores. The kind that reminds you love doesn't vanish, it endures, quietly and faithfully. There are evenings when I still feel him near, when the garage light glows against the dusk and the scent of oil fills the air. I close my eyes and can almost hear his voice, calm and reassuring, reminding me that some people never really leave us. They just live differently, in the spaces between silence and memory. So if you've ever been saved by someone's love, even after they're gone, hold on to it. Share it. Let it guide you when everything else feels lost. Because real love doesn't fade, it rebuilds. It forgives. And it lasts long after we do. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it. Tell me where you're listening from, or who your Mustang is, the piece of love that keeps your world alive. Sometimes, love itself is the truest kind of forever.